Today, we're going to talk about 5 power phrases that you can swap out for weaker phrasing so that you come across with more leadership, more credibility, more command, more authority, and influence. There's actually so many incredible ways that you can benefit from these phrases. And so much of our language, it seems is subtle, but it actually is critical to how we come across and how we are perceived in our personal brand, whether it is professionally or whether it's personally. Now, of course, this podcast is devoted primarily to those of us that are in business or in leadership. And yet, what's so great about learning some of these different phrases and, of course, the tone and all the things that we talk about here are really being equipped with what words can you actually use, especially when you're in a more challenging situation. And we all know, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you now, the prep makes all the difference. Walking in with a strategy versus not having one at all. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I had when I didn't have a strategy. Many, many years ago, I was in a leadership role in a boardroom presentation. And although it was informal, I didn't agree with what my boss had suggested I present. And therefore, I didn't say anything because I thought, well, that's not a therefore, but I thought that, well, you have to do what your boss tells you to do. I was taught, like most of us women who have been culturally conditioned in our families and just in life, that you don't question your boss, you just do what they say and you figure it out. You don't want to look stupid. You don't want there to be backlash. There's so many things that happen related to our doubt and the societal pressure, as well as things that we've experienced, some of us in our childhood. And I bring all of this up because I've been there. I get it. And I didn't have a strategy. I was tongue-tied, my stomach was in knots, and my boss shut down the meeting. I was absolutely mortified. And then she pulls me aside and says, Karen, you didn't trust your gut. You could have just tabled the meeting. And I'm thinking, what? I could have just tabled the meeting? And then secondly, I'm thinking, why do I keep asking for permission? Now, if I had had a strategy in that place and I had had some phrases or at least had been somewhat prepared, there's so many things that I would have done differently if I was in that situation now. But one of the biggest ones is that I would have said something. And too often we don't speak up. And that's such a big and important piece of my message in general. And I don't want to just leave you hanging with theory or, hey, just have more confidence. That is not going to help anybody. So, what we want to do, of course, is give you really specific things. So, I want to unpack 5 different phrases of what is often common that we say by habit, and then what to do differently that will really help you to sound more credible and more authoritative. You'll command more rooms, and ultimately, you'll be seen as more of a leader. So the first one is, instead of, I think we could, say, I recommend we. Now let's talk about why. So let's just give this an example. I think we could add this as an additional project to our repertoire. Now, a lot of times, so that doesn't sound terrible, right? But if I say it in a tentative way, I think we could add this to our repertoire. I'm clearly not going to sound very confident. Now, instead, think about all of this really brings up tonality as well as the what we're saying. So notice how what I meant to say when I said, I think we could, it doesn't sound bad because I'm saying it with authority in my voice. But when I add in the pressures of being at meetings with a group of people, some we know, some we don't, we generally don't really know what they potentially are thinking. Well, we don't know what they're thinking in their heads for sure. So there's all of these things that we have in our minds of how are they going to perceive this? What is that going to be like? And so I want to remind you that being equipped with the phrases and then in addition to that, having that great authoritative tone is going to make all the difference. So again, instead of, I think we could move this project forward, say, I recommend we move this project forward. And that will make a big difference in sounding so much more confident. And a lot of times what happens, and believe me, I understand, we fear being strong in our language. So another thing I want to recommend to you is using a tool that I use when I started out speaking my voice in meetings and that kind of thing. I remember my boss used to say, you always come to meetings with all of the data, all of the information, and then you say, what do you all think? And one day she said, Karen, I want to know what you think. And honestly, I did not even know what to say. My jaw dropped. I thought, I was not prepared for that. So here's what I taught myself. As a way to bridge a baby step, instead of just coming in, here's what I think, I decided to use a term that works really well for me. It's diplomatic and it's direct. And the phrase is, here's my vote. What I love about that is that it's neutral, but it's also saying what I think without saying, well, here's what I think. It's just simply, here's my vote, or my vote is that we do this, or my vote is that we try that. So that's another idea when you want to make a recommendation. But to simplify it, let's go with instead of, I think we could, say, I recommend we. That's number one. Number two is a very common one that people say all the time, and I definitely want to unpack this one. Instead of saying, does that make sense? Say, what questions do you have? Let's unpack this. Part of the problem, now I know some of you might be listening going, oh my gosh, I always say that all the time, or there's nothing wrong with that. And when you continually say, does that make sense? It can sound as if you don't believe that you're making sense or that you don't have the confidence that you're making sense. So you have to ask. You have to ask permission. Now, I recognize that a lot of people do it to get some head nods, to get people's acknowledgement of they're with me. And occasionally it's okay to use it in that way. The bigger problem is when we use this as a go-to all the time, that over time it can erode our credibility. Now, a lot of people in the sales arena coach to say this phrase, does that make sense? To get people to, it's so interesting, psychologically say yes. Yes, that makes sense. Because frankly, very rare is there going to be a time when somebody says to you, nope, that doesn't make sense, especially if they're in a group, because nobody wants to look stupid. Nobody wants to be an outlier in that case or look like they might be rocking the boat. As a matter of fact, there was a study that was done, and this came to light again. I hear this reference time and time again at, I believe it was Swarthmore University, and they presented people with three lines on a piece of paper, and two of the lines were the same, one was different. And they had them labeled A, B, C. So they asked everybody which lines are the same. It was really obvious which lines were the same. But because the experimenters had planted people in the room to initiate, oh, nope, it's B and C. Like the two that didn't even match, they would say, oh, those are two are alike. And the majority of people in the room agreed with the person that was clearly wrong. So this just speaks to how much we conform to society around us. And it is just incredible. We have such a strong sense of the need for belonging. And as a fun fact, did you know that the sense of belonging is our number one need after food, clothing, and shelter? So there is a very strong drive for this, which is a big reason why people often, if they are asked, does that make sense? They don't want to say no, even if it doesn't make sense. And in fact, I was on a call with a client today who felt really uncomfortable asking for what she needed when she was invited to ask or invited to say, "Hey, what do you think about this? Are you, would you like this?" And she just said, "No, no, no, I'm fine." And I'm not going to get into details here on this podcast since it is confidential and that might be revealed if I say the scenario. So instead, say, what questions do you have? Let's talk about why we do that. When you, first of all, does that make sense? Is a closed-ended question. It is a almost a very, if you think about every word, the economy of words, or let's just say every word costs $20, you wouldn't use does that make sense because it doesn't give you anything except a yes or a no. And usually it's a yes. So, what questions do you have is an open-ended question, which will give you more robust information that will inform you to determine what more you want to say in that scenario. Or is that a time to be quiet? It really depends, but you will definitely get a response that is a lot more fruitful than a closed-ended question. Alternatively, you could say, how is this landing for you? Or what's resonating for you? Those are also very good questions to garner more participation. Now, all of this depends on the scenario. It depends, are you in a meeting scenario with a lot of people, or is it a one-on-one? Is it up on a stage? There's so many different times where you've just got to know the scenario. At the end of the day, I always tell people, common sense overrides judgment. Or no, what am I trying to say? Common sense overrides any of these concepts. Okay, the third one is instead of saying, I'm sorry, but, or I'm sorry, I'd like to add something. I'm sorry, I'd like to say something. I'm sorry, do you have a moment? We don't need to apologize when we want to speak up. Instead, say, I'd like to add, or I'd like to share something. Or simply ask the question directly. You don't have to front load it with anything. This is really important to remember. We are so conditioned to say, sorry, sorry, sorry. We've got to get out of that. As I like to tell people, be sexy, not sorry. Remember that. In fact, I was laughing because at one point I bumped into somebody at a conference with a lot of people walking in a big hallway. And she accidentally did the tiniest bump into me. She goes, oh, I'm sorry. I said to her, be sexy, not sorry. And she started laughing her head off. And then we connected. We had a connection call after that, and it's been fun to get to know her better. Okay, so let's recap that one again. Instead of sorry, but, or any sorry in advance, say, I'd like to add. And this is a great example of having these phrases at the ready. Write these down, even if you don't know that you might need to use them. Now, obviously, when you're preparing for a meeting, hopefully you have some idea of what kind of questions you might get or just how people are going to show up in the meeting. So have your ammunition ready in the best way possible. Number 4, instead of saying, I'm not sure, but say, let's explore this option, or let's experiment with this, or let me get back to you. I'm not sure, but just sounds like you're hesitant and you're tentative. Now, if you said, I'm not sure, but I'll find out, that's a little bit of a different story. But notice also the difference between I'm not sure, the I message, versus the collaborative phrase, let's explore this option. It is inviting. It's and said with a lovely tone like that, it can sound really warm and exciting almost like, whoo, I want to try that option. Instead of that hesitant, I'm not sure, but. Number 5, instead of saying, maybe we should, say instead, let's move forward with this. Now, I recognize that this is all dependent upon the scenario, the decision makers in the room, all of the things. But I wanted to remind you that the ones that we've talked about that are the ones not to say are all they can be when we add in the hesitancy, the language is weaker, but it's also the language combined with the tone. I know we started the episode with that. And instead, really looking at how can you move things forward? Because let's face it, language shapes leadership. And when we can replace tentative language with confident and direct phrases, your influence will really grow. It is really amazing how these subtle differences are huge. And over the years, I've gotten a lot of compliments. Now, I understand that and I'm not saying I'm not, let me give you context why I'm telling you this. Okay. It's not like I'm trying to say, oh, look at how great I am. What I want to say is that I have made a living of communication and being an expert in communication. So, from the perspective of the delivery to the content itself. And what I have noticed in the compliments that I've gotten over the years is that outside of when I mean, people compliment me when I'm on the stage, don't get me wrong. But the point I want to make here is that every time you open up your mouth, you have an opportunity to influence. And so many times people will say, I love to listen to you speak, or I'm really engaged when you talk, or you have great energy. And that's available to you too. You don't have to be me. Not that you would want to be me, but the point here again is to remember that all of these skills are learned. You can learn these skills. The question is there enough motivation for you in your life to see the difference that a transformation can make in how you communicate? This is part of the problem that I see with a lot of people. They don't think that there's a good enough reason to make that difference or to make, let's just put it this way, to put in the effort to make the change. And like I said, of course, I do this for a living, so there's a high motivation for me. But it is so fascinating how communication is the thing that sets people apart. You could have two of the exactly same qualified people, but one is able to communicate her ideas better than others and in a way that is projecting authority, commanding attention, and is warm and likable. There is almost no contest. The person, even if, and let's even take out if they're equal, that's one thing. But you know what the most unfair thing is, but it's the unfair advantage in life, is when you don't even have as much experience as that other person, but you can communicate it so much better. Then you're going to get that job or that promotion. I've seen this time and time and time and time again. The people that communicate are the ones that people that communicate well are the ones that get the jobs, the promotions, the salary increases, the business deals, all of the things, the guy or the girl or whatever it is that you want. And I'm a little tongue in cheek with that. Obviously, there's got to be chemistry romantically, but we're talking about work here. So keep that in mind. And remember, I'm going to repeat these 5 phrases again. So instead of, I think we could say, I recommend we. Number 2, instead of, does that make sense? Say, what questions do you have? 3, instead of sorry, but, or I'm sorry, say, I'd like to add. Number 4, instead of, I'm not sure, but say, let's explore this option. Instead of, here's number 5, maybe we should say, let's move forward with this. It is such a different feel. So remember, I am for you. You can do this. Keep working on it. And remember that communication absolutely will set you apart. So, in thinking about what's coming up, by the way, did you know that my husband and I are in a book together? We wrote our story about hope through his kidney transplant journey, and we waited 5 long, excruciating years to get to that point. I am so proud of his growth, and we have culminated this experience in a book called Unshakable. It's by Carrie Conley. She's the one that led the book, but there's a bunch of authors in it sharing their stories of hope through their whatever perspective. And in my case, it is a story of hope through community. So would love to have you buy that if you'd like to grab that on the shelves. And I'm working on my next book, which is going to be about asking for what you want. So if there are things that you want me to cover related to asking, please, please, please let me know because I am in the midst of writing that now. The first chapter is done, the outline is done, but there's going to be room for different stories and examples. So if there are things that you want me to cover, please, please, please send me an email or reach out to me in any way, shape, or form. I'm on all the platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram in particular, but I look forward to learning more from you and about you. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to use those power phrases and see the difference that it makes. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.